Have you ever had a busy week and noticed that you haven't gotten your bike down for a while, and when you get it down and get ready to ride, the weather's nice, you start noticing that it's having some troubles. Maybe you have a flat tire, maybe it's not shifting right. Or you're riding more often and sometimes it's easy to not notice that your chain hasn't been lubed for a while, or that you haven't checked your cables until you notice that your shifting isn't working or you hear your chain chattering. For the month of March, we're talking about bicycle maintenance. Last week, we talked about a real overview of checking your bike to know exactly what's going on with it, and it was really thorough over the entire bike. Something you want to do every few months, maybe annually, depending on how much you ride, or if your bike has been in storage for a long time. Today, we're going to talk about just checks and maintenance that you want to do weekly, whether your bike's been hanging for a little while, or if you ride regularly. These are the kind of checks that you want to do each week. I'm going to bring my bike out again as an example, but first I need to clean it up. Okay, a much cleaner bike. So every week, it's a good idea, or maybe every few weeks, but more often than the few months to a year maintenance and checks that we did on the bike last week, you want to do some regular checks on the bike. Now, this is a little more thorough than what you would do every day or every time you ride, but there are some checks that are the same that you would do each week or every time you ride. So first, we're going to check the condition of our cables. So the cables here, these are our shifter cables and brake cables. They can wear over time as they get grime, dirt, and are damp. They can begin to wear, and also just the movement back and forth on the bike. And so it's a good idea to check the condition of our cables, look close, and also check your housing. Check where they enter and exit the housing. For some of you, cables may run through the body of your bike or run through the frame, and you can check the areas where the cables actually are accessible and see if that area is clean, and you can also lubricate your cables in those areas. The other thing that you want to check are the points where your cables are attached, the bolts that are on there. Cables sometimes can get a lot of wear and begin to break and fray. And that's something that you want to check as well. We want to check our wheels. And the trueness of the wheels we can check while we still have it on the bike. I'm going to close this brake up here and make sure it's fairly aligned. And we can spin the wheel. I can spin the wheel here and take a look down the middle of it and see if the wheel wobbles back and forth at all. This also gives us an opportunity to check the spokes. Not as much as we did before, but if we notice anything like cracking on the spoke nipples or any damage to the spokes, we can do that while we're checking the true of the wheel. If you have clipless pedals, I'm going to bring this up here. And this is a combination. It's got both the platform and the clips. You can actually lubricate these, make them work a little bit better, and make sure that they're clean. It just helps with your shoes getting in and out of those particular pedals. If you have platform pedals, it's a good idea to just check those pedals for dirt and grime, especially around the axle, so that they're not rubbing or loose. Just a good way to inspect. We're going to check for play or looseness in the bearings. And the way that we do that, we'll start here with our headset. We can actually apply the front brake and rock this carefully back and forth. And while we do that, we can feel if there's any movement in this top area as we run it back and forth. And on this one, it's very tight. But this is something you would be able to feel, that little movement in there. And if it's very slight, it might take a little time for you to get used to noticing it. But if it's quite loose in here, you'll notice it right away. And then you can make adjustments to it to make sure it's good and tight. On wheels, we're just going to take the wheel and we're going to move it back and forth, not around like this, but try to move it back and forth. And that way we can notice if there are any issues with the bearings in the base. Same thing with our crank. Like we did last time, we can move it back and forth and see, not around, but back and forth, and see if it's loose. And same with our back wheel here. We're going to try and move it back and forth. That's around. We're not doing that. We're doing side to side. And those are all good. Now we want to inspect our frame and our rims. This is something that we can do while we're cleaning the bike as well. But if you haven't cleaned your bike for a little while, or if your bike is pretty clean and it's been a couple weeks, this is something else that you want to do, and that's inspect your frame for any cracks, especially if you have a carbon bike or your bike has had a wreck. You can inspect your bike at the weld points, like here and back here, for any cracking. I do have carbon forks on here, and I know that there is some wear and tear on these forks, so it's something that I like to inspect. And also inspect the sides. Also inspect the rims of your wheels to make sure that there isn't any cracking. And this can actually occur right around where your spoke enters the rim. You can check to see if there's any cracking. On wheels that use rim brakes like this, you can also check that rim portion of it, make sure there aren't any cracks or extra wear through there. It's a good idea to keep your chain lubricated, but you don't want to keep it over lubricated. Every few weeks you can clean and lubricate your chain. Now you might do this when you wash your bike. You can also do this more often. A common question is how much or how often do we lubricate our chains? And this weekly check gives you a good opportunity to lubricate your chain, give it a bit of clean off, put a rag around the chain, and turn your crank so you can get the dirt and grime that's attached to the chain off of there, and then add some extra lubrication to make sure that it's working. And in another video, I'll show you actually how to add the lubrication to your chain and the different kinds of lubrications. But you can add some lube, and this is the lubrication. If you don't have bike oil or something similar to lubricate cables and pedals, you can use chain lube. It's more specific for chains, so it might be a good idea to look at a couple different kinds of lubrications for your bike. Checking the air pressure on your tires. This is something that you want to do pretty much every time you ride, but it's a good idea to check them again each week. You may have found that your tires hold up really well. Do like I do, and the very non-scientific pinch test. That's not a really good way of checking the exact pressure of your tires and making sure that they're functioning right. So getting something like a digital pressure gauge, or even using your bike pump to give you a better idea of where your tire pressure is. That's also a good time to inspect your tires for wear and inspect your brakes and brake pads for wear. And then finally, as I said before, this is a good time to lubricate areas of your cables that might have drag, like where the cable enters your housing, and a good time to lubricate brake caliper pivot points, those areas where they move. Same thing with your front and rear derailleur. Those areas get very dirty, and as we wash them, sometimes they begin to have some friction, and adding a little bit of lubrication in there can help reduce wear and tear, also little sounds that your bike might make. Something else I want to go over just briefly is torque and torque checks. There are areas of your bikes, like this headset here, that have specific torque values, and they don't want to be over tightened or under tightened. And that's something that's a good idea to check every few weeks as well. Now, there are a variety of torque wrenches, and a torque wrench tends to be a specialty tool, like some of the other tools that you might need to work on your bike and keep it maintained. Torque wrench can be expensive, but they don't have to be, and it really depends on the kind of work you do on your bike, how often you maintain your bike, and whether or not you want to do all of the maintenance on your bike, or if you just want to be able to check the safety of your bike. You can get compact, minimally set torque wrenches like this, though this is a higher end torque wrench tool. It doesn't have a huge range and it's pretty compact. This is also similar to one that's set for a specific torque value, like 5 Newton meters, which is often what specific parts of your bike require for the maximum amount of torque or maximum amount of tightness on them. Those kinds of tools tend to be less expensive than a specialty tool. And when you compare those to very inexpensive, this is from a cheap store, cheap tool store. So I only paid $20 for this, but this thing is gigantic, it's heavy, and really just for doing the minimal work that we do on areas that we want to keep specifically tight, like our headset and maybe some of the other parts of our bike, something like this can really be overkill for the amount of money that we invest. It can work in a pinch when you're not working on your bike often, but for the kind of tool that you need, it's really big and it doesn't really offer a good value compared to a preset torque wrench or a compact torque wrench like this. I'm going to include at the end of this video a short review done by another YouTube channel on a good value, what looks like a good torque wrench that you could use if you're wanting to do more to your bike as far as torque values or work on your bike than just something like the headset. As the weather changes, or if you're in an area where you can get out and ride more often, it's always a good idea to continue to be familiar with your bike and do these weekly checks. It also helps reduce the amount of time that you take in doing the monthly or annual checks. Next week, we may have a ride, or I may do an update on the bike builds that I've been working on, but we're also going to go over either the next video or the following video for March. March continues to be our maintenance and service month, and we'll go over the daily checks and something called the ABC Quick Check, which is just a very easy way to remember the parts of the bike that we want to check on a daily or when we ride basis. Alright, that's our episode for this week. Thank you again so much for watching. If you enjoy this content, please feel free to give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel and share, and I'll see you again next week. Thanks. Bye.